All right, so she's supposed to look at me. That's
You
good.
should speak up.
Okay, I will speak clearly.
What?
Is she supposed to look at me?
Yes.
We'll just pay no attention to them. All right, so it's August 7th, 2008. So what we want to do is we want to have you describe your life both for ourselves and our kids and our kids and their kids and their kids and their kids and their kids. So, why don't you start by talking about your name, where you were born, and let's start talking about your family.
Well, I was born November 25th, 1930, in Cleveland, Ohio. At that time, they had the worst snowstorm they ever had.
You mean on the day you were born?
On the day I was born. That's true. And I was born in a hospital. Not everyone at that time was, but I was born in a hospital. I was an only child for 8.5 years. And then my mother and dad had Kate. And shortly after I was born, maybe 9 or 10 months after that, they moved to Detroit because my father needed a job. He was working in Cleveland. He was working for the railroad, and then they moved to Detroit to get work in the auto factories, of course.
So he was working in the railroad when you were in Cleveland.
Yes, but I honestly don't remember that.
So it was only about 8 or 9 months when you left?
Yes, and then we went to different places in Wayne, Michigan, is where we lived most of the time until I started high school, and then we moved to Elm Park. And my sister Kay was born on June 18th, 1939. And there was just the two of us. And my
So you were in grade school when she was born?
Mhm. And my father worked, as I said, for the auto companies, and he was president of the UAW union at Graham Page, which was a car that they had. He worked for Graham Page, he worked for Kaiser Frazer. Those are car companies that are long out of business, but that's where he worked. And we lived in Wayne, as I said, and then after I got out of grade school, we moved to Elm Park. And when we moved to Elm Park, that's not right. Before that, in 1944, my mother worked for the post office.
Oh,
And that's how we got to Allen Park, because she was able to save the money to get a down payment. Because in those days it was very hard to save any money, because when you worked in the auto companies, there was no, if you were laid off, you didn't get paid, period. If you got sick, you didn't get paid. There was nothing that you got. And so they'd work for about 6 months, and they'd be laid off for 6 months. And so she'd save when he worked for 6 months, she'd hang on to that. And then the next 6 months, when he wasn't working, she'd use that money she saved to get him through. So they didn't have any extra money to buy a house. So she worked in the post office and saved her money. And as soon as the war was over and she didn't work there anymore, they took that money and bought the house in Allen Park.
So her working enabled them to get the house.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. They could never have done it without that. Absolutely.
And they waited till the war was over?
Mm-hmm. Well, because you couldn't, during the war, you couldn't buy anything, do anything. Everything was rationed and all that kind of thing. So after the war in 1944, they bought the house. And so it was a nice brick house in Allen Park. And
That wasn't the house on Winona?
it was the house.
It was
on
on
Winona.
Winona.
Yeah, and it was a bungalow with a big room upstairs, and then a living room, dining room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bath, and a basement.
Oh,
We never had a garage.
What was the address? It was 7703.
That's
Winona?
Winona. And my father always had a beautiful garden. He had a vegetable garden. We owned a lot next door, and he had a beautiful vegetable garden. And then after that, he had flowers and all that kind of thing.
Which lot next door to you? Which lot did you own? To the, which way?
The one south of us, there was no house there then.
But then he sold it. Because when I came around, though, you didn't own the lot anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, he didn't own it anymore. No, it was sold. Yeah, we sold it. He sold it. And when they bought that house, he wanted to buy all the lots from the house to the corner, which is maybe 10 lots. And my mother didn't want to. which was a mistake because they sold them for, they could have sold them for a lot of money, but they didn't.
Oh, he
because,
wanted to buy 10 lots in
Yes.
a row.
right. And
So
also,
he could have afforded to do that?
it would have been a little tight, but they could have, because
So what about-
she just had, they had just gotten a house and everything, so.
So that might have been a smart move on his part.
Yeah, he was very smart in those kind of things. He bought a lot in Florida. Sight unseen, he saw it in a magazine, he bought it, and he paid like, I really don't remember now, but maybe $400 for it. And maybe 20 years later, they sold it for like 30,000.
Oh, wow.
Never even saw it or anything.
So he had a good, he went through high school and then he educated himself through books, and there was no television, that kind of thing, but through books and, correspondence courses, that kind of thing. He was very, very intelligent. He was a very intelligent person, he really was. He invented things. He invented different things, One time he did a bolt or something, I don't know. I don't remember. So did he ever get a pet?
I think he did get a couple, not a lot. But,
So that means that each of my grandfathers invented things.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And each of them had patents, I think.
Yes, oh, definitely, the other one did, absolutely. Also, he liked to fish, and, well, he didn't go too often, but he liked to fish. He was very quiet, kind of.
But he was smart.
He was very smart. He was quiet around us, but he could be very extroverted, like when he was in the union and that kind of thing. He could be very outspoken, yes, and outgoing at different times. And but to tell you the highlight of my life when I was, not really, but when I was 6 years old, I led the Labor Day parade down Woodward Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
And in those days, the Labor Day parade was a big, big deal, because the unions were really, really big. That was the beginning of the big, big unions. And also, my father did know Walter Reuther, and he was also in that Ford Bridge thing when they fought the unions.
36?
Yes, yeah.
Quite a big.
Yep. So he was involved in all those kind of things.
So you were raised you were a union man's daughter.
I was definitely, and I still am for the unions, and will always be.
So go back to the time you moved from Cleveland to Wayne until the time the war was over, and you kind of growing up in Wayne. You were an only child. Kate wasn't.
I was an only child for 8.5 years,
Right.
and then Kate came.
So what do you remember about those early years before she got there? Was it kind of?
It was nice. It was great. I went to school. I had a lot of good friends there. I still remember their names, and one of them I lost track of because she left her husband and married somebody else. I can't find her now. I don't know her last name anymore. But
So those were people from grade school.
those were grade school. Yes, and I remember them. I had a good time in school. I always liked school. I was always good in school. I always liked school. It was fun.
So was it lonely or quiet being the only child?
It was quite being the only child. When I lived in Wayne, one time when we lived in Wayne, we lived in an apple orchard, and I had
In an apple?
in an apple orchard. There was a big brick house right on Wayne Road. That was the only house on the road at that time, but it was a main street, but it still was one of the only houses there. And we were in an apple orchard. An apple orchard was all around us, and
Is that house still there?
I'm not sure if it's still there or not. I've probably been out there for years, but it was there for a long time. Whether it's still there or not, I don't know. But anyway, I didn't have anybody to play with, so I would play under the apple trees, like that. And the nearest neighbor to us was probably 10 lots past us, and he was an old man. And that vase that's up there, someplace, that
This one in here? This? That?
that's not an antique. He brought that over to me, and he had a whole big pile of things, and he put this on top of it. And my mother saw it. She said, "Oh no, drop it." But so that's definitely an antique, and it's kind of beat out, but it's pretty.
Show the folks at home.
Show the folks at home. Isn't that
There,
pretty?
they can see that.
That is, it's pretty though. That's from my mother.
So that was from when you were on Wayne Road?
That's when I was with
Who gave you that?
Pardon me?
Who gave that to you?
This old man, can't remember his name now. Somebody like Mr. Smith. I think it's Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, and he was an old man, and he gave me that. And then
He
when
gave-
I was,
that was a lot of years ago.
I know it was.
That,
And then-
well, you kept that very well.
Yes, yes. And then around that time also, I got pneumonia, and they didn't think that I was going to live. And my parents
So you
spent.
were 5, 6?
I was about 6 or 7. I was in school, so I was about 6 or 7. And my parents spent like 3 weeks down at Harper Hospital because they didn't really expect me to live. And my Aunt Lorette and Joe, my father's sisters, paid for that. I found the bill years and years
Oh.
later. And
Those are those 2 older aunts that never got married?
yes, Aunt Lorette and Aunt Joe. And then after that, it took me a whole year. I couldn't go back to school for a whole year. And a good friend of ours that lived at the other side of where we lived, on the next corner around, who was named Irene and Tom Russell, she came to your wedding too. by
Oh,
the
I
way.
remember them.
And she was a teacher, so she tutored me for that whole year. So I never lost any time at school because she, tutored me that whole time.
So you were in Harper Hospital for 3 weeks and they thought you weren't going to make it?
That's right. That's right. And the way I got there was I had my tonsils out in a doctor's office, and I had a little cold, and my mother told the doctor that, and he just went ahead with it anyway. And they thought in those days they thought that was the reason I got pneumonia. Whether that was true or not, I have no idea.
Well, it could have been.
But I remember very vividly the soda glasses that were this high, that were like this and like this and like this. I had to drink 4 of those every day with milk in them to build myself up.
After the surgery?
Yeah,
You had to do
afterwards
it.
when I was recuperating for that year, I had to do that every day. So, but actually, in spite of all that, I've been very healthy all my life, and I still am very healthy. Thank you, God.
So that pneumonia was kind of caused by the tonsillectomy, really?
Yes, yes.
But it had you affected for a year? How long did you feel bad from it?
Well, yeah, I couldn't go to school for a whole year, honey. I mean, I wasn't, real sickly or anything. I wasn't in bed or anything like that. But I couldn't go to school for a whole year because what they were afraid of is I would catch some germs and then I would really die. So they didn't let me go to school. Okay. But
So
I did never lose any school though. I mean, when I went back, I was in the right grade and I never,
So that was like you were 6 or 7. So that was in like 1931 or 1932.
No. I was born in 1930, Bad
Oh.
Patricia.
Sorry, 25. So in 36 or 37, right?
Yes, dear.
So 30 years after that,
30 years after that, what?
history repeated itself, and I got pneumonia. And I went to school.
Yes, you didn't miss a day.
I didn't miss a day. 30 years later.
But you were very different because you had pneumonia with no fever, which is very unusual. That's how healthy you were, but it's very unusual to have pneumonia without having a fever.
I had
Very
no
usual.
fever.
You had no fever.
Oh, no.
I mean, they did finally catch it, but when there's no fever,
They had
there's
twice,
not many
actually.
symptoms. Well, after you have it once, it's very easy to get it again.
Yeah, 'cause I had it
And that's
twice.
what happened, right?
So I didn't have a fever, so that was sort of why.
Well, yeah, because usually when you have pneumonia, you get a real bad fever, and that tells you you're sick, and then you go to the doctor. If you don't have a fever, how are you supposed to know? Kids get colds all the time. Okay.
Well, my teacher knew because she thought it was what did she call me, a seal? Because I was always barking and coughing in class. She always gave me a hard time with that. But now I see that was much better than the way it was 30 years before that, because 30 years before you missed a whole year and I didn't miss a day.
That's right.
So I just think it was not connected.
Okay.
All right, so that was Irene Russell tutored you?
Yes. She was a teacher.
Well, she was not much older than you, or I mean,
She's much older than I will tell you. When you guys got married, she was 80.
Oh, okay.
So, but how old she was then, I have no idea. But
So she tutored you for a whole year. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were in an apple orchard, and you it was a little lonely not having anybody to play with, but because there weren't any people, there were 10 houses.
yeah, there were no kids really. There was really no kids around at all. It was different. There was no subdivisions like there are today in that country.
You were almost living in the country.
Yeah, it was in the country. It was probably 5 miles from, maybe 3 miles, 3 to 5 miles from the heart of Wayne. You know, we weren't even in the city
You weren't
really.
even
We
in
were
there,
out,
okay.
you know, quite a ways, so there wasn't really nobody at all.
Well, the only reason I mentioned that about whether what it was like having no children, no siblings, is you've often said when you had 8 kids, which comes later in the story, that had something to do with growing up without any. So I just
Absolutely,
so could you talk a little
absolutely.
bit about that?
I certainly can tell you about that because when we had holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, there was nobody there but Kay and I and my mother and dad. And there was no relatives.
And before Aunt Kay, there wasn't even her.
That's right. We had nobody because all the relatives lived in St. James, Minnesota. And I had one uncle that lived in Flint, and he had one daughter, but we saw them like once a year at the most. And for holidays, we never had anybody. And I always thought that these people that had these big families, how wonderful that would be to have a large family. So what I did was went out and got my own. So now I don't have that problem anymore. When I have holidays, I have so many people I don't know what to do with them all. And I love it, every minute of it. And that's true because I really did. I always wanted to have a lot of people.
But the holiday, I never heard that. So the holiday part was an important part. It wasn't just someone to play with. There was something about the
Oh
holiday.
yeah, it wasn't so much
family
somebody to
part.
play with, you know, because as time went on and I went to school, then I
That
got
was sort of
friends.
fun,
You
but
know,
it was the holiday piece that really sort of.
yeah, right. Because we never had anybody over at holiday because there was nobody to have, you know. And once in a while, people would come from Minnesota to visit, like in the summer, that kind of thing. You know, my grandmother stayed with us when we lived on Winona for maybe 2 or 3 months. My poor grandmother, you know, had no money. In those days they had, you know, no Social Security, no anything. She had no money, period. She never had anything, a house or anything else. And so she'd live at our house for a few months, and then she'd go back to Minnesota and stay with her sister. And that's how she finally ended up with her sisters.
So there weren't grandparents. There wasn't really anybody. So
I never had a grandfather, and I never had a grandmother on my father's side because she died when I was of breast cancer when she was about 52.
Okay. Yeah, let's get
And
to
so
those.
the only grandparent I ever had was this one grandmother, and the only thing I really remember about her very well, 2 things. She said a rosary every day, and every afternoon at 3:00 she had what we today call punch keys. I don't know what they called them then, but she had one of those with. I don't remember that she had coffee. Maybe she didn't have any, or maybe she had milk or something. I don't know, but I remember she had that every day. She had to have that snack. And my grandmother was very large. She weighed at least 300 pounds.
Now this was your mother's mother,
Yes.
and she lived in Minnesota.
Mhm.
And you saw her
Sleepy
every.
Eye, Minnesota. I saw her rarely. That one time she came for 3 months. That was about the only time that I saw her. Really,
So
you know.
just to wrap up the holiday thing. So one of the reasons you really love holidays because you love it. Everybody knows how much you love holidays. That's sort of part of it. In other words, you saw
It's
these
definitely
holidays.
part of
There
it.
wasn't anybody, and so you
Right.
created holidays that were the way you wanted them
That's
to be.
exactly right. No, exactly right, honey. That's exactly what I did. And I had 8 kids. If anybody wants to know.
So on the grandparents, so there was your mother's mother. She was large, lived in Sleepy. I didn't see her very much. Anything else you remember about her?
No, not really. I told you the 2
You didn't
things
see
I
her very much.
remember. But, you know,
Those are the 2 things.
and well, Dad has something he remembers. We took her one time back home to Sleepy Eye. We went up through the Upper Peninsula, you know, and he said that she sat in the back seat and she just thought he was such a wonderful driver. But she ate a box of candy all the way from here to Minnesota.
She had the whole box of candy.
And to my knowledge, she never had diabetes. You know, I don't believe that she ever did.
Now she died at 52 of breast cancer.
No,
That's the other one.
that's my father's mother died. That grandmother died at about 79, and I really don't know just what she had. You know, one time she had some kind of cancer, and they gave her 24 hours to live, but she got through that, and then she was pretty much okay. But she ended up in a nursing home, and exactly what she had, I really don't know what she had.
They just didn't say which 24 hours.
What?
They said she had 24 hours to live, but they didn't designate which 24 hours.
Oh, that's right. That's true. Very
There's
true.
more than 24 hours. So you didn't see her a lot. You
No, I didn't see her a lot at all,
Yeah.
you know. I sometimes when I was younger, like when I was 12 or 13, I'd go to St. James, Minnesota and visit my aunts. You know, the two maiden aunts, Aunt Loretta and Aunt Joe. And I remember one time very vividly, that's when TB was rampant. And my aunt would not let me go out and visit. You know, we had friends there and kids my age, that kind of, she wouldn't let me go because she was afraid I'd get TB. Because in those days, you know, that was very serious. You know, people did all the time.
So they, I remember meeting them, and so they were important to you because again, there was so little family that they were.
Wait a minute, I misspoke, that's not right. It wasn't TB, it was polio. I'm sorry, it was not TB, it was polio. That's when polio was rampant, not TB, polio. And then they wouldn't let me go over and see
Because
her
of
or
the
see anybody because they were afraid that I would get polio. That's when it was really, you know, it was really bad.
But it seemed like you always kind of liked those aunts, and what I was saying.
I did.
'Cause
Oh,
you
they
didn't
were
have,
very-
You didn't have a lot of family, and they were kind of special.
They were
because
very good to me. They gave me a lot of things. They, you know, they gave us sterling silver when we got married, which was, you know, unheard of in those
Yeah.
days. You know, they had a lot of money, and they, well, as I said, they
They
paid
don't
my
kid.
bill when I had pneumonia.
Yeah.
You know, and they
So they were kind of, they took a special interest in
interested
you,
us. They always did. Right.
Because they didn't have any kids and you didn't have any relatives,
Right.
and so they were.
Right.
That was really that's why. And
And
I
there was
remember meeting them.
There was another aunt that you didn't meet, Aunt Catherine, that lived in California, and she worked at the Hotel Coronado. You know, that's a famous hotel, and she
Yeah.
worked there as a waitress for years and years and years. And she's the one that sent me the book about JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy,
Oh.
that you got. Remember? Do you still have that?
I think so. So she I never heard of her. So she now.
Well, you know, my father, honey, came from a family of 9. He was the youngest of 9.
Oh, all right.
And my mother was from a family of 5.
So even though the families were big, nobody was around here basically.
No, but it was, well, no, because they all lived in Minnesota and we lived here, so obviously we never saw them. They would come occasionally, but I mean very occasionally. And in those days, people didn't travel like they do today either.
Because it was
you know.
hard to get around.
Right, they would drive, they wouldn't fly, or nobody flew in those days. If you went, you took a train, and it was, you know, people
Long
didn't
way.
have any extra money. There wasn't extra money in those days. I mean,
Yeah. So, Aunt Lorette and Aunt Joe, those were your father's sisters?
sister, yes.
And there were a lot of other of those, but they weren't.
Yes, right. And Aunt Catherine was my father's sister. And then there was another sister, Maribel. There was another sister, Celie. She lived in St. James too. And then there were brothers. But those brothers left home and my father never saw them again. There was one brother,
Oh, wow.
Brother Bill, that lived in California. And my mother kept in contact with them, but my father never saw any of them. Well, he saw Aunt Loretta and Joe, but I mean, the brothers he never saw again or contacted or anything after he moved.
So it wasn't just geography, there was some way in that family of 9 that people weren't so close, or at least, I mean.
No, they were not.
They were
Well,
not.
see, you know, also, you can see why. The mother died when she was 52. They must have, a lot of them must have been very young. My dad especially must have been very young. And
Well-
so there really wasn't, you know, a real bonding there probably. And the older sisters are the ones that took care of everything. You know,
Oh, yeah,
because
that
there was no
happens.
mother there.
So she died when she was 52 of breast cancer. Where was he in the constellation? He was 9. Where was he?
He was the youngest.
Well, he was the youngest of
Yes.
9.
Yes.
Um,
And my grandfather, my dad's father, was postmaster in St. James. And then my Aunt Joe also worked at the post office her whole life long. And my Aunt Lorette was city clerk in St. James.
so they were very involved there.
Yeah, they lived there their whole life. And that's where, you know, why we have that town named after Grogan, because it was named after my grandfather.
So Grogan, no, but he was the postmaster of St. James. Did he start Grogan? I mean, what?
Yeah, Grogan is just a little town outside of St. James.
So he kind of started it. He was
Yeah.
still the postmaster of St.
Yeah,
James, but he
I
lived
guess,
in Grogan.
Yes, right. No, he didn't live in Grogan. He lived in St. James. I don't know why they started it. They just had a town there called Grogan. I don't know.
Did any of your relatives ever live there?
I don't know that. Maybe they did. I have no idea. I remember, but that was so many years ago, honey. I was
All right, your grandmother was only 52. Your grandfather, it was kind of hard to keep the family together. The older, so there would have been a way that when she died, sometimes women would often keep the family together, and the family didn't keep
Right.
together.
Right.
And the people that you knew were the people that stayed around St.
Right,
James.
right, that's right.
Now, did your father and mother meet in St. James?
Yes. They got married in St. James. But my father was 7 years older than my mother. And my mother was very young. My mother was 15 when she got married.
Oh, wow.
And she got thrown out of the house when she was 12 years old because my grandmother married somebody, and he made her get out. She had to go and babysit, and she went to babysit in St. James, and that's where she met my father. I mean, I don't know how the whole thing came about, but that's how she did meet him.
All right, so let's go back to that. So your grandmother, so they lived in Sleepy Eye?
My grandmother lived in Sleepy Eye,
Okay.
and my father lived in St. James, but they're little,
They're
little
little
tiny
places
towns
in
right next to each other, maybe 2-3 miles away or something. It wasn't any big, any big distance. They're all little tiny towns.
So how many times was your grandma married?
You don't have enough time for that in this one.
Well, I've never heard about her.
Oh, she was divorced. First of all, let's start at the beginning. She married my grandfather. He died at 34 or
I
35.
think I need a new page for this.
Yeah, 34 or 35.
So let me say again. So your grandmother married your grandfather. Okay.
Yes, and his name is Ravitzer, and he died when he was 34 or 35 of TB,
Oh, yeah.
and he owned a bar.
Oh, all right, okay.
So then, in those days, there was no way to support. She had 5 kids. There was no way to support him, so she married somebody or other.
All right, so he died of TB.
Yes.
She was how old at that time?
He was 34 or 35. She was probably 28 or something. I
She was
mean, I
younger
don't really
then.
know, or 30 or something. I don't know.
Right.
So then she, there was no other way to support those 5 kids unless she got married. So she
Now,
married
hold on
somebody.
one sec. Hold on. So the 5 kids, your mother was one of the 5 kids, by the way.
Yes.
Which
My
one
mother was
she?
the youngest. My mother was the youngest.
So your mom and dad were 2 youngest?
Yeah.
Kids. Okay.
2 youngest children, right? Okay. So she married somebody. I don't know anything about the details, but she got a divorce from him, which was, the whole family was scandalized because those days you did not get a divorce.
Oh.
Okay, so she got a divorce. Then she married somebody else. This other guy was an idiot, really. He eventually he killed himself, and he tried to kill her too. He put poison in the sugar or something in the house, and they found it after he died. She knew that he would probably do something like that, so she
She
the
didn't fall
police
for
came
that.
and checked it out, and it was true that he had, he was really crazy. But anyway, he is the one that threw my mother out and said you can't live here anymore.
Oh, he was the one. That
Yes,
did.
right,
Oh.
right. And so she went to St. James, and she got a job there babysitting, or a nanny, or whatever they called them in those days. And then, she met my father, and that was scandalous because you have to understand, my father was a prominent family in St. James. My mother was not prominent in Sleepy Eye.
Oh, okay.
And so that was kind of, but.
So wait. So in St. James, the father's family, he was the postmaster. They were all sort of involved there.
In St. James, yes.
Right, and in Sleepy Eye, she was
She was
widowed and divorced a couple
right,
of times.
right. It
Lunatic
wasn't,
and-
was not. I'm sure that they weren't happy about that at all. But at the same time, my aunts were always very, very good to my mother. They liked her very much. They tried to help her, and they did help
Loretta
her.
Joe and
Yeah, right. They were, they were very, very good and kind to us always.
And they could have taken a protective role because they would have been like an older sister to her.
Yeah.
And sometimes when that goes, when the family's more better put together than another, they kind of take them in.
Right. Well, that's
They
what.
kinda
That's
did that.
surely what they did. That's
Yeah,
surely
yeah.
what they did, and they helped out my folks a lot. Well, like I said, they paid for my operation, or not.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
my whatever it was, an operation. Exactly, it was hospitalization. Because in those days they didn't have such thing as hospitalization, so they paid for all that. So I mean, they did help a lot.
So your mother the family was there, all the kids were born, everything was fine, and then your grandfather died of TB, and then she had these different men, one who she needed a divorce. What about after she divorced? Well, he killed himself then?
Yeah, he killed himself, and then she never married again.
She said enough of this.
I don't blame her on that one. So mostly, like I said that already. She lived with her sister. They owned a bakery, and so and she had other sisters in the area too.
Oh, she was the one who became 300 pounds.
Yes, right.
Wow. I didn't know any of that. You know, when we do this with Andrew's family, it's amazing that we think that, oh, these scandalous times. No, times are always scandalous. There's always scandals going on.
I know.
It's amazing.
That's life. That's exactly life.
All right, so that was your mother, and so with your father's family, and so she was younger, but they seemed to do pretty well. Then when did he took her to Cleveland when she was like still young?
Well, no, she wasn't so young. I mean, they'd been married 10 years when I was born.
Oh.
So she was like 25 or something like that.
Well, did he try to make her go of it in St. James?
Well, he did. He worked for the railroad. They had the railroad transfer him down to Cleveland.
Oh, all right.
He had a job all the time, and then, but when he got into Cleveland, I guess the work wasn't real good or he didn't make much money, or I don't really know, that's so long ago. But anyway, that's when the auto industry was just starting up, and that was big money for, any kind of money was big money in that days, $5 a day was big money, when the auto industry started. So he got into it, and it worked out very well for him, really.
So he tried to make it in St. James because that's where the family was.
Right, but he was kind of a loner. Like I said, he never really corresponded with any of them. If my mother had kept contact, he never would have. So, I mean, I don't know. He was the youngest, and you know how the youngest kids are.
Well, we have in our family two youngest that have a high school romance going on with two youngest kids. I love that. Well, tell me a little more about your mother and father in terms of as you knew them, like what they were like, and a little more about that.
I don't know. My mother always had a very good personality. She was always outgoing. Both of them were very outgoing. Actually, that's where I probably get it. My mother used to sell, work for a company that took pictures. Like in those days they'd come to your house and take pictures of the kids. You didn't Sears and that kind of stuff. They didn't do that. So they'd go to the house, and she would sell. She'd go like door to door and give these people coupons, and then they'd come and take pictures and that kind of thing. She did that, for a long time. My grandmother when she lived there, she used to crochet pot holders and that kind of things, and then I would go out and sell them. But she began my selling career.
So your selling career came from both your grandmother and your mother.
Yeah, we did.
And you passed it on to us from the age of 7 or 8, whatever it was we were delivering eggs. We were 8 or 7 or 9. That was 9.
Whatever, we were the oldest, so you
Right,
probably were.
So she did. So let's go back. So she worked at the post office to help you move from Wayne to Ellenborough.
Yes.
And then she worked selling things down in the
Yeah, she always did, something. She never, she worked at the post office, but I don't recall her ever working in a store or anything like that. She never did that, but like I said, she would sell things or work on the phone and sell things and, that kind of.
So she kind of liked to work.
She did like to work.
So she was outgoing, and anything else you can tell us about her?
She was pretty. She always looked very, very nice. She always had on earrings, pretty clothes, always, always dressed up. She always, people are always commenting to me in today's world, most people don't wear makeup. And people just the other day were saying to me, how come you always wear makeup? I said, because when my mother was alive, the first thing she did when she got up every morning was to put on her makeup. She would never, if she stayed in the house all day long, and most times she did, she always put on makeup. And she always had a little apron. Always. But she always, any picture you see of her, like the pictures of you kids when you were little, she's always dressed very, very nicely. You never see her sloppy, never, ever, ever. She always was, just, her hair was just so, and her makeup and her, everything. She always had, when she worked at the post office, she had blouses with like ruffles on them. Then she'd have a hanky, a crochet hanky with a little, lace on it in the pocket. That was the way they did it in those days. And so she was.
This is the recording we're giving on to us.
35 years.
We're getting on this now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. So, So she liked to wear makeup, keep herself. She cared about how she presented. She always looked good. So did she, her and your father go out much?
They did. They did. Especially when he was in the union, they did. And then afterwards, when they lived in Wayne, they had a group of people that they went around. They went out with. Again, that was not. There wasn't money in those days, but they would go to different people's houses and they'd bring, cheap casseroles. They'd be like macaroni, tomatoes, hamburger. Everybody would bring their stuff, and they went around with some people from Wayne Stein's. They owned a flower shop, and some other people gigs that they did something. I don't know what they're bringing over. I remember going over to Stein's. They had a greenhouse, and I remember they had a great big house, and all the kids would be up in the back rooms playing while the people were downstairs talking and playing cards or whatever they were doing. I don't recall them playing cards, but they maybe did. I don't remember.
And you'd be up there playing with the kids.
Yeah, games and stuff.
So they were both outgoing. They were both, and so they did have a social life, and they did get out. And
They did. I remember one time they went to bringing back some strange memories here. One time they went to a Halloween party, and my dad had great big shoes on, and my boyfriend at the time laughed about that for years about how funny his shoes were.
What was he supposed to be?
I don't even remember that. I just remember that, you remember, a little picture of what happened in your life. That's the little picture I have. I don't know.
What was your boyfriend's name?
Dick LaVoy. That was the first love of my life.
Well, we'll get to that.
And thank you, God. It didn't work out. But at the time, I thought it would be the end of my life. I was so upset, And my mother was, you put your stuff down, you should say. My mother was always there for me. She really was, like bringing that up. This is way out of context, but when he broke up with me, when I was 18. And I was just devastated. And I was up at U of M then. And, but my mother, said, don't you worry, tomorrow we'll go over there and see him. And she just was always there for me, And I remember when I started working at the Detroit Bank, I thought she would come down and look at the place and see if it was okay for me to work. She was so controlling. I figured that she'd have to come down and make sure it was okay.
Did she?
No, she didn't. But I remember thinking that at the time.
So she was really very there for you.
She was always there for me. She always was, no matter what. She'd get upset with me with some things and all, but still she always was. And like I said, with that, to me, was very traumatic. How kids are. It was very, very traumatic. And it wasn't really too traumatic because like 2 or 3 days later, I started going with your father. And look what happened.
And what's his name? No, I just
That was the first father. No, but truly, when I met you, I know we're going all over the place.
Well, that's because Andrew's getting us off track, but that's.
Oh, wait a minute, I got to say something here.
Right.
When I started going with your father and all of that, and we obviously got married, you know that. But someone else at the very same time asked me to marry him. But I said, no, thank you, God. But
another good choice on your part, just like Dick LeBeau wasn't so good, something I wasn't so good either.
No, well, this guy never would have married that guy because he was an alcoholic, and I would never have had anything to do. But he did ask me to marry him.
Who was it?
I don't remember his name at all.
Was it a relationship, or was it just was it a serious proposal?
It was a serious proposal. Yeah, it really was a serious proposal, but I was not. I had dated him for a while, and everything, but it was. I just, I would never marry anybody. My father was an alcoholic, and I never would have married anybody that drank. I never drank.
Right.
And I would never drink, and I would never, ever marry anybody that was alcoholic.
So that was a sin. So your mother was there for you a lot, which really was helpful, and to the point where, and you said she was controlling.
She was controlling, very controlling.
Tell me about that, because of course it was just like you're right. we only see it one generation. We don't see it two. So
I know, no. She was very. Well, she had 2 kids and didn't work that much. Didn't have that much to do. What else are you going to do but control your kids? I managed to control my kids, and I had a lot of.
You got a lot of stuff to do. That's right. That excuse doesn't work for you.
Right.
So, But so she was controlling, but yet she was there for you a lot, which is helpful.
Right.
So what was your relationship with your father like?
I didn't have a relationship with my father. I really did not have a relationship. He just ignored me mostly, and he did the same thing with Kay. And but I always felt that he loved me, and I knew that he loved me. But he just, was quiet, and withdrawn. He'd lay on the couch and watch television, and he just never said anything or never took any active role in my life at all. And I mean, once in a while. I mean, remember a few times he took me to church in the morning. Not always, but I mean, he would once in a while. And when I got married, he, walked me down the aisle, and but for the most part, I just didn't have much of a relationship with him at all.
Now, did you sort of did you take it personally? Did that sort of bother you, or did you sort of think that was the way sort of guys did it that way? He was sort of working hard, and came home and just lied on the couch.
I took it personally at the time. I mean, now this is many years later. I have, come to the, I've resolved it in my mind now. But it took me a very, very long time to do so because but I never thought that he didn't love me, but I just thought he was plain not interested, and I think that was true. He just wasn't.
And that sort of, as a little girl, that kind of course, it bothered you.
Yeah.
So did his drinking, did that screw up the family?
Oh, yes. When we lived in Wayne, I mean, being out in the car with him one time, he was beating on my mother, and I did honestly like that. It scared me to death, and the police came over and said, of course I was crying hysterically, and the police said, "Look what you're doing to this daughter," and that kind of thing, and it did screw up the family a lot. And I probably don't know, but he drank for a long time. And then my mother and Kay, after Dad and I were married, we moved to Hazel Park to an apartment. And he was crazy, and so we went and got my mother and Kay, and they came and stayed with us for a few days. And then he was going to burn down the house. He had all the clothes in a pile in the bedroom or something. He was going to burn it down.
The house in Elm Park?
In Elm Park, yeah. But he didn't, obviously. And anyway, so then they stayed with us for a few days, and my mother had never done that. And all that she'd gone through with him, she'd never left him or said she would, but she did. And that did wake him up, and he really never drank again. He quit drinking right then, and he never drank again. He never went to AA. He was very strong. My parents were both very strong-willed. And he never drank again. After he had quit drinking completely for a while, he did, towards the end of his life, he would drink maybe a couple of beers down there, but I mean, before he drank whiskey and all this kind of stuff, and he got absolutely crazy. But he never, after that, he never did it again. And quit. And that was it.
So basically, it was sort of like the early 50s, or almost close to when I was. It was like 50,
Well, it was.
55, 54, 53.
Well, honey, we got married in 1950, and so it was. I don't know, 40s. Well, no, it was after we were married that this happened. So maybe 51 probably, because we got married in 50. We lived in that apartment, then we bought that house.
So basically, she sort of stood up and said she'd sort of had enough.
She did, right.
He got to the thing that alcoholism does, of the craziness of burning down the house.
Yeah,
finally,
he was
He,
nuts.
he was able to see, oh, this has kind of gone too far.
Yeah, no, he
And then
like I said, he was strong-willed, and he didn't drink again. He was strong. In fact, he was very physically strong. He always was. He wasn't a big man, but he was always very, very physically strong. Always worked very hard, very, very hard worker. But just all you remember, you don't remember the flowers in the garden, everything he had. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were gorgeous, and now that you're a homeowner yourself, you know how much work that is. And he had in a beautiful garden, a whole lot garden, whole
He
thing.
didn't really have a lawn. I mean, he could do,
Yeah.
because he had all this other.
Oh yeah.
When I've driven by Winona in the last 10 years, or it's so sad to drive by with 7703 Winona, because I recognize the house, and when you drive there, it's just a regular lawn, both in the front and the back. And
Yeah.
it's great to go to his house because it was just
Oh yeah, they had everything.
all kinds of different things. So when he stopped drinking, was he Well, did your relationship with him change?
No, it never changed. Well, then honey, how could it change? I wasn't even there. I was, I was gone, and then I was having my own family, and
Did his
But he
relationship
was-
with your mother and Aunt Kate change when he stopped drinking?
what's the
Did his relationship with your mother and Aunt Kate change after he stopped drinking?
Oh, I'm sure it did, because Aunt Kate was still there, so I'm sure it did, but like I said, I wasn't really there, so I don't know. And then I was having, shortly after that, I was starting to have my kids.
Yeah,
you
right,
know.
so then it would have been.
And it's kind of interesting, you were saying that my mother had me when I was 25, and I had you when I was 25, even though I got married before that for a long time, 5 years, but that's the way it went.
It's the same age, right? All right, so let's go. So you said you liked school. You did. What high school did you go to?
Lincoln Park High School.
Okay, and did you do activities in high school? Tell me a little bit about you in high school.
I liked high school. I tried out for some plays. I didn't really make it, but I tried. I liked them.
You tried for plays.
I was
That's how Kelly likes it.
I was president of the roller skating club, and I couldn't roller skate. Little things like that. But I
That's
liked high
okay,
school.
we have a president of the United States and he can't.
Can't roller skate.
Sorry,
like
Gavin.
Right, you're right. Okay. No,
So
I-
you're all right.
But there was like 226 people in my class or something, and I was like the 26th or 27th. So I did well.
So
in
you're
school.
smart in school. You did well.
Yeah,
in school.
I did well. So I liked school a lot, and then I went to University of Michigan, and the rest is history.
So any other activities in high school?
Boys,
So
I took up. They had Arthur Murray dance lessons. They came and gave dance
Oh.
lessons. I did that, and I loved the parties, and it just was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed learning.
so you had a number of boyfriends
Got a lot of boyfriends.
and friends as well.
Yeah,
And you're kind of social.
Oh, lots of friends. Yeah, I always had a lot of friends, a lot of boyfriends. Always.
And a few of them you still know.
Pardon me?
Some of whom you still know.
Not so much anymore. I did for a long, long time. One of the girls that that's not really true, I guess. Dad's friend that he was in the army with married one of my friends,
Oh.
and we still see them occasionally. They live in Virginia now, but I mean, we saw them a few years back when we went to Florida. So there's a few. One of the girls that I was closest with, we saw her husband because he worked at Ford's and he knew Joe, but they ended up getting divorced after 30 years. But the rest of them I really don't see.
All right, so high school was a good thing. You were involved in different things. You
Oh
were
yeah,
smart.
I
you did
liked
well
high
in
school. It was fun.
Had different boyfriends.
Yes,
and went off
I
to
did
college.
well, and I had a great time, and it was fun. I enjoyed high school.
So when you went off to U of M, what did you study at U of M?
Well, first of all, I was going to study to be interior decorator, and then I realized I had to be able to draw and all this kind of stuff, which I couldn't do. I mean, I really didn't know. The guidance counselor that guided me didn't do a very good job of giving me an idea what I was supposed to do. And then what really happened was the first semester, I didn't do real good in school, and I would have been like on probation or something. And I mean, I could have gone for the next semester, but I would have been, I don't know what they called it then, maybe it was probation, maybe it was something else, I don't know, but anyway. And then I said them to my mother, and she said, well, maybe you shouldn't go back because we really can't afford it. So I didn't go back then.
So you went for one semester.
Yeah, I went for one semester.
So you had sort of that U of M experience that a lot of people have, where you start out being really smart in your high school and you get to U of M and they're not so smart when you
That's
look
right.
at oh.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But it was meant to be. But the thing that really, I was determined at that point that someday I was going to go to college.
Okay, so when you left U of M, you clearly said you're going back.
And clearly I did.
You did.
I graduated when I was 58.
Right.
Couple weeks there before I went back. But
But
Which
you
one?
did.
Which school was it?
You were there for the graduation.
I know.
Mercy?
UD Mercy. But
Yeah.
it was Mercy then,
Mercy
but now
before
it's
you
called
bought it,
UD
yeah.
Mercy.
Okay.
Yeah, before it was. Yeah, that was wonderful graduation. I love that.
So
but I
you
was
left
just
and you were going
determined.
back.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, a couple, 2, 3 times I enrolled at Wayne, and then every time I get pregnant, and it was too much with it. I had little kids at home, and then being pregnant, I couldn't. You know, I just really couldn't do it at that point. So I waited until I could, and I did.
You did.
And that was amazing also because Michigan National Bank paid for the whole thing.
The Mercy? Right, Mercy? Wow.
Yeah, and Mercy was an expensive college. It was a private college at the time. And, well, I guess it still is, but anyway. And they paid for all of it, you know, which was very, very good.
Why did they pay for it?
Because I was working there.
So that was
And it was-
after you were, that was.
Right. Well, yeah, I was 58 when I graduated. And, but they paid for the whole thing. Even one semester when they had paid all they were supposed to pay, but I had to send in the bills because you're sending the bills, you know, whether they paid it or not. And I figured, well, they'll just send it back and say, you know, you have to pay it yourself. They didn't. They paid it.
Wow.
They paid the whole thing, which was absolutely amazing. And, you know, and I graduated at 58, and then I retired at 59 and a half. So they didn't get much out of my college education, but that was a wonderful job. Well, that was my job there. It was marvelous.
The Michigan National Bank? What did you do for them?
Well, there I was working for the mortgage company, but you're skipping a whole
Oh,
bunch of my history.
Oh, no, I know, we're gonna go back to dad, because that's what we sort of left off. But, so anyway, Michigan National paid for, your degree, but the important was, when you were at U of M, when you were leaving, it was clear to you that you were leaving, but you were gonna go back.
Oh,
And you
absolutely.
made
And
that
like I said, I tried to go back a
couple
number of
times
times, but
away,
it just, you know, and then you kids were getting into college, and
yeah,
we had to pay for that, and so you know, there was no way that I could go back. But when I did go back,
you
I
did.
did. And the last semester I was on the dean's list. I got a raise.
So,
So
so
I was determined.
ended with a flood. All right, so you're at U of M. So when did you? So that's you're there for the fall semester. So when did you meet Dad?
On my birthday, which is November 25th.
You met him on your birthday.
Yes, well, we were working at this little coffee shop. You know that story.
That part I remember.
And so he was taking me home, and he asked me out, and I said, no, I can't go out because I'm going out with my boyfriend, which was this Dick LaVoy. And so then when I broke up with him, I was trying to get hold of Dad, and I didn't even know his last name, so I couldn't get hold of him, obviously. So, but then we were back, you know, we were working at this coffee shop, then we were going back to working, and he started taking me home, and the rest is history.
What's the story about the salt?
But you know, the salt, we were working in this, it was just a coffee shop, it was at the Log Quad, it was just a coffee shop.
Was it the Law Club?
Yeah, it was at the Law Quad. It was, well, you know, right out alongside the Law Quad. It was a
Yeah.
house by the Law Quad. It was
Yeah.
actually in a house, an old house.
Was Dominic's as well? In that place?
I don't know what the name of it was. I don't even know. It was a retired policeman that ran it and owned it, but I don't know. Anyway, I put salt in his coffee on purpose because that's the kind of person I am. I don't know why I just did. It would be silly. I don't know why. Anyway, and that made him notice me, and so then he asked me out. He'd been asking me out anyway, but he thought he couldn't ask me out because he thought all the lawyers, you know, the lawyers come in, they flirt all the time, you know. And I was pretty when I was young, and so he thought that they were all going. I was dating all these lawyers, and I wasn't dating any of them, but that was okay.
So that illusion was let that go. He must have
No,
let that
that's
go.
right. It was an illusion. So anyway, he started, you know, taking me out, and I said the rest is history.
So that was November, and so then
We got married when like a year and a half later, about, because we got married. I was 19, but we got married in August, and I was 20 in November, so it was really.
so he kept going to U of M, and well that's right, because he came back from the war. So
He was on the GI Bill, and he graduated, and then we got married, and we had no money. And when I say no money, I mean no money. We had a $500 judgment against Joe because he'd been in a car accident, and they couldn't do anything to him. So he didn't go when the judge said come to the court. He didn't go because he said, what can they do? I don't have any money. Well, they could. They had a judgment for $500. So when we got married, we were in debt $500 right to start out with. And he had no money, and I was working at the bank for $35 a week. And so we paid off the $500. That's how we started our marriage, with nothing, and nothing.
So at that time, you were living in
in
El.
with my folks for the first 9 months until Dad got out of school.
Of the relationship or of the marriage?
Pardon? What was the question?
You were living with your folks while he was
Yes,
finishing
right,
school,
I
while you were
was-
just dating, or even
No,
after you're
I
married.
was married.
Oh, okay.
No, I wasn't dating. I was married. We lived there for 9 months after because he was in school. He'd come home on the weekends, and I was working in Detroit Bank off the judgment.
What a beginning! It's quite an auspicious beginning to what turned out to be pretty good, but it didn't
It
start out
turned out wonderful, but it wasn't so good when it first started. But we were young, we didn't know any better, so we just paid the bills and we saved our money, and we got our first apartment was in a basement, a cold, clammy basement. And my mother said, "Don't get a basement apartment," because so of course I had to get a basement apartment. So we stayed there for a few months, and then we moved to a nice apartment, and that's where my mother and Kate came to stay.
This was Hazel Parkway.
Right.
So
And
for the
then we-
first 9 months of your marriage, you weren't even living together.
No, we were not. Well, he came home on weekends, and that kind of thing, but I mean, no, we were not.
So where was that basement apartment?
It was in Hazel Park too. It wasn't far
Okay.
from the good one that we had, but this one. But in those days, people were just coming home from the war. It was very hard to get apartments. It wasn't just that I was being obstinate. It was that there weren't a lot of apartments to get.
Yeah.
And somebody we knew had this one or something, and then that's how we got it. But
So it was hard to get an apartment. When did you find an apartment in Hazel Park? How long were you in the Hazel Park apartment?
it could have been a year or so, but it wasn't a real long time, because we were, we got married in 50. About in 53, we moved in the house in Northville, so it was like a few years. It wasn't a very long time.
So when did you get the Ford job? That's of course made all the difference.
Well, when did you get the Ford job? You ask him on his tape.
Yeah.
No, he had a couple of little jobs before. They were good jobs. I don't mean it like that. I mean, he worked at Giffords and Belay. He worked at a couple places. He worked at the Arsenal, but he just didn't care for it. And then he got Fords, and then he stayed there for 35 years almost.
But did that allowed you to have the money to move to Normandy?
Yeah. But also, we got the house on the GI Bill. We didn't need to have a lot of money.
Oh, because you didn't
Because
need
we
a down
didn't have
payment
much
and
money.
stuff.
I mean, even I remember I worked at the auto. I worked at Detroit Bank and Trust, and I worked in the auto finance department. And we tried to get a car. We never had any money to get a car, and finally we managed to scrape up enough money to get a car because we didn't have any money. We didn't have anything, but we did finally get one. So. And I was manager of that department, the auto,
Of the auto loan department at
at Detroit Bank and Trust.
Was that the bank you worked at? Did you want to change
And now ask me one more question. Do I know the people that from there? I still have 6
do.
or 7 friends from
it?
there.
Right.
Well, a couple of them died unfortunately, but I mean,
That
I
was a
still
core.
keep.
That Detroit Bank and Trust was a big job. That was you were there. for a
And I
while.
have, and I know I still have a lot of friends from there. A lot of friends from
What
there.
were the years? Would that be the early 50s?
Yeah.
That's when Uncle Al worked here too.
Oh
You
yeah.
worked at Detroit Bank and Trust.
Yeah.
In
What was he?
He was in the trust department.
Oh my goodness! Oh wow! Oh yeah! No, I was in auto loans, and I was in charge of them. I was young. I wasn't even 21 then. Yet.
Wow.